The subway ride begins. Jason Statham leaned back in his seat, relishing the quiet anonymity that enveloped him. The low hum of the train as it cut through the tunnels felt soothing, like a lullaby for the weary. He could almost forget that the world knew his face, that his every move was often watched and analyzed. For once, there were no paparazzi lurking at the end of every corridor, no fans asking for selfies. He could breathe, and he welcomed it. The subway car had a worn, utilitarian charm to it. The seats were a dull shade of gray, slightly cracked from years of use, and the metal poles had been polished smooth from the countless hands that gripped them. The smell of the car was unmistakable, an odd blend of old leather, stale air, and the faintest trace of someone's forgotten meal. The cold fluorescent lights flickered above, casting a dim, almost eerie glow over the passengers. Jason's eyes shifted from one face to the next. He wasn't particularly curious, but he couldn't help but observe. The world always seemed so different when you weren't the center of attention. A woman sat a few seats away from him, engrossed in her phone, her fingers gliding over the screen with practiced ease. She giggled at something, probably a meme or a funny video, and for a split second, Jason wondered what it would be like to live without constant pressure, to simply exist without being scrutinized. A businessman nearby was tapping away at his laptop, oblivious to the world around him. Jason couldn't help but wonder what was on his mind, what kind of life he led when the doors to this train closed and the real world began again. But his gaze kept returning to the woman sitting near the door. The elderly woman, her shoulders hunched as she made her way into the car. Her steps were slow, deliberate, as though each movement took an immense amount of effort. Jason could feel the weight of her age, the long years of hard work and challenges reflected in the tired way she walked. Her black handbag was clutched tightly against her chest, as though it were the last thing that connected her to a world outside this train. Her presence was almost haunting. It wasn't just the way she moved, slow and careful, as if wary of every step, but the way she looked at the people around her. There was a quiet desperation in her eyes, the kind that only someone who had lived through too many disappointments could understand. She was searching for a place to sit, but none of the other passengers seemed to take notice of her. Jason's heart sank as he saw her glance across the car, hoping for some kindness, for some simple act of human decency. But none of the young professionals, the tired office workers, or the busy commuters made any attempt to acknowledge her. They looked away, too lost in their own lives to notice. Jason's stomach twisted with frustration. He had seen too many moments like this in his lifetime, too many times when people looked the other way. It wasn't just a matter of manners, it was a reflection of the indifference that had crept into the world. No one moved. No one offered their seat. The woman's eyes lingered on a few empty spaces, and for a second, Jason thought she might sit in the seat next to him. He briefly considered standing up to offer her his spot, but then something stopped him. It wasn't that he didn't want to help, it was more the feeling that this wasn't the right moment to make himself seen. But then, the unmistakable sound of a scuffing shoe on the floor snapped him back into focus. A man entered the car, his steps fast and deliberate. Jason's eyes flicked over to him, noting the way the man's eyes darted around the space. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with a look of someone constantly on edge. He was wearing a plain gray hoodie, the hood pulled up tight around his face. He didn't have the confidence of someone at ease, but rather the nervous energy of a predator stalking its prey. Jason's instincts flared immediately. There was something about the way the man moved, his darting gaze, his fidgeting hands, the quick, erratic movements, that screamed danger. It wasn't just the hoodie or the general disheveled appearance. Jason had seen it before. The subtle twitch of a hand reaching into a pocket, the sudden shift of focus when a new target was spotted. The man's eyes locked onto the elderly woman, who had now settled into a seat near the door. The bag, her only possession that seemed to bring her some sense of security, was tucked firmly against her body. Jason followed the man's gaze, and his chest tightened. This wasn't just a coincidence. The young man's eyes never left the woman's bag as he moved closer to her, his feet barely making a sound on the subway's cold floor. He was circling, sizing her up, the way a predator would assess a potential victim. His movements were quick, but his gaze remained fixed on her. Jason's heart rate picked up. The woman, unknowing of the danger approaching, seemed to shrink into herself even more as the man closed the distance. The train had slowed as it approached the next station, and Jason could feel the tension in the air. It was as if the entire car had become aware of what was happening, the unspoken realization spreading like wildfire. People shifted in their seats, but no one seemed to want to acknowledge the situation. They could feel it, but they were too afraid to act. It was easier to pretend nothing was wrong, to keep their heads down and stay out of trouble. But Jason wasn't like them. His gaze locked onto the young man. There was no doubt in his mind now. This wasn't just a subway ride, this was a moment waiting to explode. The thief's hand reached out, fingers just inches away from the woman's handbag. He was so close now, so intent on his target, that he didn't even notice Jason's movement. Jason's muscles tensed, and his mind went into overdrive. It wasn't about the stolen bag, it was about a person in need. Without thinking twice, Jason stood up. He moved with quiet precision, his footsteps silent against the cold metal floor. His hand brushed against the pole near him as he shifted to the aisle, moving swiftly but deliberately. He didn't need to make a scene, his presence would be enough. Jason's eyes never left the young man, his every sense honed. The closer he got, the more his body shifted into action mode. He was ready. The woman's bag was still firmly pressed against her chest, her eyes focused downward, oblivious to the looming danger. And then, with a speed that matched the sharpness of his instincts, Jason moved forward, closing the gap. Just as the young man's hand grabbed the strap of the elderly woman's bag, Jason was there, his hand shooting out to grip the thief's wrist in a firm, controlled hold. The man flinched in surprise, his eyes wide as he turned toward Jason, realizing too late that he had been caught. His face twisted into a mix of anger and fear, his lips parted as if to protest, but Jason didn't give him the chance. Jason's voice was calm, yet commanding. "Not today." The thief froze, unable to move. Jason's grip tightened, a reminder that there would be no escape from this moment. The rest of the subway car fell silent. All eyes were now on the two of them, the man who tried to steal, and the one who wouldn't let it happen. Jason's presence, quiet and unassuming just moments ago, now filled the space with an undeniable authority. He wasn't just another commuter anymore. He was the protector in this small, fleeting moment of injustice. The thief's face turned pale, his eyes flicking toward the door, the windows, any possible escape route. But there was no escape. The train rumbled forward, and the rest of the world, for the first time in a long while, stood still, the thief's mistake. The tension in the subway car was palpable, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. The sound of the train's rumbling, the soft whisper of air through the vents, everything seemed to fade into the background. All that was left was the scene unfolding between Jason and the thief. Jason's grip on the young man's wrist was firm but controlled, his fingers pressing into the delicate pressure points, ensuring that there would be no fight, no escape. The man's body stiffened, his muscles frozen in place as his mind scrambled for a way out. The train's wheels clicked along the track, the low, rhythmic sound adding to the gravity of the moment. Jason's eyes locked onto the thief's, a silent exchange of understanding passing between them. The thief's face, which had been tense with anticipation just moments ago, was now marked by confusion and fear. He had clearly underestimated the situation, thinking that an elderly woman would be an easy target, someone too frail, too weak to resist. But he hadn't reckoned with the man sitting quietly just a few feet away, watching, calculating, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Jason's heart beat steadily in his chest, each thought a reminder that he was no longer just a man on a subway ride. He was part of a much larger moment, a moment that would soon become more than just a chance encounter. It was a turning point, for the thief, for the elderly woman, and for Jason himself. The thief, realizing he was trapped, made the fatal mistake of glancing toward the door, as though he could escape through the narrow opening. He was desperate, his eyes darting to the crowded car as if seeking help, but there was no one coming to his rescue. The passengers around them, who had been sitting in silence just moments before, were now watching with bated breath, a mixture of disbelief and relief on their faces. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the sudden shift in power, but none spoke out. The entire car seemed to hold its breath. Jason's voice broke the silence, calm and deliberate, but with an underlying firmness. "You made a mistake," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This isn't your moment to take from someone else." The thief's lips quivered as he tried to gather his thoughts, his fear manifesting in rapid, shallow breaths. I didn't mean," his voice cracked, the bravado he'd once had slipping away with each passing second. But Jason didn't let him finish. "There's no excuse for what you were about to do. You're better than this. Walk away now, before I make sure everyone knows exactly what you've tried to do." The young man's eyes flickered nervously between Jason and the other passengers. A bead of sweat trickled down his forehead, but Jason wasn't fooled. This wasn't just a case of someone making a bad decision in the heat of the moment. No, there was something deeper in the thief's eyes, something that spoke of a life lived in desperation, a series of bad choices that had led him down this path. Jason's mind raced, not with the adrenaline of the confrontation but with the realization that this was more than just a chance encounter. This man wasn't just a random criminal. He was a reflection of something much darker, a societal issue, a systemic problem that had pushed someone like him to make a desperate attempt at survival. Jason didn't know his story, but he could feel it, the weight of this young man's decisions. It wasn't the first time he'd seen it, and it wouldn't be the last. But right now, Jason's focus was on the woman, the elderly woman who had been the target of this assault. He slowly turned his head to glance at her, his gaze softening as he saw the fear still etched on her face. She was looking at him now, her eyes wide with shock, her knuckles still gripping her handbag as if she might need to protect it at any moment. Jason gave her a reassuring smile, a subtle but firm gesture to let her know everything would be okay. He didn't speak to her, there was no need. The elderly woman had witnessed enough to understand the gravity of the situation. Her gaze shifted from Jason to the thief, and for the first time, she seemed to notice the true danger of what had been happening. The thief, seeing his victim's recognition, faltered for a split second. That was enough for Jason to tighten his grip, his fingers now digging into the thief's wrist just enough to send a shock of pain through his body. The thief gasped, trying to pull his hand free, but it was no use. Jason was stronger, more precise, and far more experienced in this type of confrontation. The young man, now visibly shaking, let out a short, frustrated cry. "I'm sorry. I didn't," his words trailed off as he realized that no one was buying his apology. Not the woman, not Jason, and certainly not the onlookers who had begun to murmur among themselves. Jason's voice was quiet but steady. "I don't need your apology. I need you to understand something." He paused for a moment, making sure the thief was listening. "You've crossed a line, and you're going to be held accountable for it. But I'm giving you a chance. You can walk off this train right now, and I won't make this a bigger deal than it has to be. But if you stay, if you make any more moves toward this woman or anyone else in this car, I won't hesitate to ensure you don't get away easily." The young man's eyes shifted from Jason's firm expression to the elderly woman's shocked but steady gaze. A flicker of uncertainty passed through him, the realization that he was trapped settling in. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked like a young boy who had been caught doing something wrong. His bravado, his anger, everything that had once seemed so real, now seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but a defeated man. "Please," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean it. I don't want trouble. I just needed the money." Jason's expression softened, just slightly, but his grip never loosened. Life doesn't always give you the easy way out. But you can make better choices. This doesn't have to be the end for you. The thief's lips trembled, and for the first time, he seemed to consider the possibility of escape, not just from the subway, but from the life he had been living up to this point. The world outside the train was waiting, but it wasn't just a simple exit, it was the chance for a new path, one he could choose to take. The train came to a screeching halt as it entered the next station. The doors slid open, and the thief stood there, his body shaking. Jason held him still for one more moment, ensuring that he wouldn't try to make a run for it. And then, slowly, the thief took a deep breath and, with a look of resignation, stepped back. Jason released him, his grip loosening just enough for the young man to stand up straight. Without a word, the thief turned and shuffled toward the door, his head down, his hands in his pockets as if trying to make himself invisible. He didn't look back. As the doors slid closed behind him, the subway car was left in an awkward silence. The passengers seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, the tension easing out of the air as the train began to move again. Jason sank back into his seat, his heart still pounding in his chest, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet pride. He hadn't just stopped a crime, he had given someone a second chance. Whether the thief would take it, or whether his actions would change anything, Jason didn't know. But for now, it was enough to know that he had done the right thing. And that, in this small, fleeting moment, made all the difference. The woman's secret. The subway train jolted again, and the rhythmic noise of the wheels grinding against the tracks returned, filling the space with a hum that almost seemed to drown out the quiet murmurs of the other passengers. The tension that had held the car in a tight grip began to dissipate, but Jason's mind wasn't entirely at ease. The moment had passed, and the thief had walked away, but something lingered in the air, a curiosity, an unanswered question. Jason turned his attention back to the elderly woman. Her frail body remained hunched over as she gripped her handbag with white knuckles, but her eyes were fixed on the door where the thief had just disappeared. She hadn't moved from her seat, and Jason could see the subtle tremble in her hands. For a moment, he wondered if she was okay, if she'd truly been unaffected by the near robbery. The elderly woman had been caught in the middle of something she likely hadn't expected in her quiet, ordinary life. He stood and moved over to her seat, his boots clicking softly against the floor as he approached. She looked up at him then, and for the first time, their gazes met. Her eyes, full of age and experience, had a wisdom that Jason had seen in very few people. There was something there, something far more than just the face of an elderly woman. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Jason said softly, his voice more gentle than usual. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let her eyes linger on him, almost as if she were trying to decipher something about him. Her face remained stoic, calm, even after the near miss of the robbery. "You've got nothing to apologize for," she finally said, her voice low but steady. "You did what needed to be done." Jason gave a small nod, unsure of how to respond to that. He was used to being recognized for his roles in action films or for his tough guy persona, but here, in this moment, in this subway car with a stranger who had been caught in the crossfire of a crime, he felt a sense of discomfort. He sat down next to her, still giving her the space she needed but feeling an undeniable urge to understand her story. "I'm Jason," he introduced himself, not expecting her to recognize him. She probably wouldn't, considering his hat and hoodie had kept his identity hidden. Still, it felt right to at least offer a name. The woman's gaze softened a little, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Lena," she replied, her voice still tinged with the remnants of shock. Jason studied her face for a moment, the deep lines that told stories of hardship, survival, and resilience. He didn't want to intrude, but something about her presence told him there was far more to her than what met the eye. "How are you holding up?" Jason asked, sensing that her calm demeanor was masking something deeper. She shrugged, her thin shoulders rising slightly. "I've seen worse in my day," Lena said, her voice distant, as if she were remembering things long buried. "But this wasn't about me. This was about that young man." Jason furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" Lena's hands rested in her lap, her eyes cast downward as she spoke, almost as though she were grappling with the words. "I saw something in his eyes. He wasn't just desperate for money. There was a look there, a look I've seen before. It's the look of someone who has nothing left to lose." Jason nodded slowly, his gaze shifting away from Lena's face to the rest of the car. He'd had his suspicions about the thief, how his nervousness had seemed like more than just the fear of getting caught. It had been the look of someone who felt trapped in a world with no way out, as though he had already reached a point of no return. What happens to someone like that? Jason asked softly, more to himself than to Lena. He hadn't meant for the words to sound so heavy, but they felt true. Lena's gaze lifted again, her eyes locking with his. She seemed to be assessing him, reading him in the same way she had the thief. There was a moment of silence between them, before she finally spoke. "Let me tell you a story." She paused, her fingers brushing the handle of her handbag as though she were gathering her thoughts. Jason leaned in slightly, intrigued. "I wasn't always like this," she continued. "There was a time when I was someone else, someone you'd never recognize." She exhaled slowly, her face tightening, as if preparing herself to revisit a part of her life that had long been left behind. "I grew up in the city, in a neighborhood not too far from here. My family didn't have much, no money, no luxuries. But we had each other. That was enough. My father worked long hours as a janitor, my mother took in laundry to make ends meet. I watched them struggle every day, and it never seemed to bother them. They always smiled, even when they were exhausted. But then one day, my father didn't come home. He was killed during a robbery. A man walked into the store where he worked, desperate, just like that young man, and shot him in cold blood for a few bucks." Jason's stomach twisted as she spoke, the weight of her words settling on him like a lead blanket. He didn't know what to say, but Lena wasn't done. "After that, everything changed. My mother became unrecognizable. She wasn't the same woman who used to smile through the hardships. She hardened, became bitter, and I learned how to fend for myself. I didn't want to be that angry, that broken. But I was, because I was so damn scared. Scared of losing the little I had left. And I wasn't alone. There were others just like me. People who had no hope, no way out. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival. About not being swallowed up by the system." Jason listened intently, his throat tight as he absorbed her words. He could feel the raw emotion in her voice, the pain that still lingered after all these years. "So, you know what it's like," Lena continued, her voice steady, though tinged with sorrow. "You know what it's like to live in that world. Where survival means doing things you never thought you'd do. Where it's easy to become just another face in the crowd. That young man? He's been swallowed by that world. Maybe not for long, maybe not even by his own choice. But I saw it in his eyes. He's been broken, just like my father. And now, he's just looking for a way out." Jason looked at her, the weight of her story pressing on him. He didn't have an answer, not yet, but the words echoed in his mind. "Sometimes, all it takes is someone to remind them there's another way," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Lena smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "Maybe so. But not everyone gets that chance." Jason's gaze remained on her, as if trying to find the right words, but he didn't need to speak. In that moment, they understood each other. Two people, strangers by all measures, but united in their understanding of the world's darker side. The train moved on, and the sounds of the city outside began to seep back into the car. The moment had passed, but Jason felt different now, changed, perhaps. A single conversation had unraveled something deeper in him, something he hadn't realized was there. He stood to leave, his mind heavy with thoughts of the thief, of Lena, and of the world outside the train. But before he could exit the car, he turned back to Lena one last time. "Stay safe, okay?" he said, his voice low but sincere. She nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. "You too, Jason." As the doors opened and he stepped off the train, Jason Statham felt something stir in him, a spark of something that made him wonder if he was more than just an actor, if he had the ability to be part of something bigger, to make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, he would see the world a little differently from now on. The subway doors closed, and the train moved forward into the dark tunnels beneath the city, carrying its passengers toward their destinations, some with hopes, some with regrets, and others, like Jason and Lena, with the memory of a moment that would never be forgotten. The unlikely encounter. The sounds of the train grew louder in Jason's ears as the subway car continued its journey through the underground maze. He couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had shifted, deep inside of him, after that brief interaction with Lena. It wasn't just the story she'd shared or the harsh reality of the world she had known. There was something about the way she carried herself, the unspoken strength in her words, that made him question what he had taken for granted in his own life. He'd always been in control, always the one who was sought after, admired, and chased. But in that moment, sitting across from a woman who had seen the ugliest sides of life, he felt small. The subway ride continued, and Jason's mind drifted back to the young man, the thief. There was something in his movements, his frantic desperation, that had unnerved Jason. His whole life had been built on precision and control, and yet this young man, his jittery energy, was a reflection of chaos. He couldn't help but wonder what had led the thief to that moment. What kind of life did he live that had brought him to such a breaking point? Was it simply bad choices, or was there more to it? Was there a system in place that failed him? Jason's thoughts were interrupted when the train suddenly slowed, and the loud screeching noise of the brakes echoed throughout the car. The doors opened with a hiss, and a new group of passengers boarded. The usual chatter filled the space, but Jason's attention was once again drawn to the group of people entering. Among them, he spotted someone familiar, a tall figure with a black leather jacket and an air of confidence. Jason's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just any regular commuter, it was the thief. The young man, who had tried to rob Lena, had returned. His eyes scanned the car quickly, looking for an empty seat. But the moment his eyes fell on Jason, they froze. For a heartbeat, time seemed to slow as Jason and the young man locked eyes. The thief's gaze shifted from suspicion to something else entirely, fear. Jason recognized it immediately. He'd been caught, but not in the way he expected. Jason couldn't help himself. His instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he subtly shifted his position, making himself visible. He didn't look directly at the thief but gave him just enough of a glance to let him know he hadn't forgotten. Jason's hand subtly brushed the side of his hoodie, a gesture that drew attention. It wasn't aggressive. It was calm, controlled, just enough to signal that he had seen everything. The thief shifted uneasily on his feet, looking as if he were trying to avoid drawing attention to himself. His eyes flicked from Jason to the other passengers, desperately searching for a way out. Jason felt the tension build in the air between them, thick and palpable, but he kept his gaze neutral. He wasn't here to cause a scene, but he wasn't going to let the young man slip away without some kind of confrontation. As the train continued its path, the thief began to slowly move toward an empty seat at the back of the car, trying to blend in. But Jason's mind was racing. He had to do something. He wasn't just going to sit back and allow this to unfold without taking some kind of action. The fear that had been in the young man's eyes reminded him of his own struggles, the inner turmoil he had faced when he was younger. He knew what it felt like to be lost, to not know where to turn. But unlike the thief, Jason had found his way out. He had found purpose, found a path to success, and now, he realized, he could help someone else find that same path. Jason pushed his way through the car, moving toward the back where the thief was sitting. The young man didn't notice Jason approaching until he was right beside him. Jason sat down across from him, keeping his posture casual, his movements deliberate. For a moment, there was silence. The young man's eyes darted nervously around the car, but he couldn't avoid Jason's steady gaze. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. "What's your name?" Jason asked, his voice calm, devoid of anger. It wasn't a question that demanded an answer, but rather an invitation to speak, an opening to something deeper. The thief hesitated, his lips trembling slightly before he muttered, "Donovan." "Donovan," Jason repeated, letting the name roll off his tongue. "I don't know what happened back there, but you're not doing yourself any favors by running from it." Donovan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with fear. "I didn't, I wasn't trying to." Jason raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not here to judge you," he said, keeping his tone even. "But I need you to understand something. You don't have to be that person anymore. You don't have to be the guy who makes desperate choices." Donovan's jaw tightened, but Jason could see the flicker of something behind his eyes, something that was more than just fear. There was a hint of frustration, of embarrassment, and something darker. "You don't know me," Donovan shot back. "You don't know what it's like. You don't know where I've been." Jason didn't flinch. He had heard these kinds of words before, from people who felt cornered, like there was no way out. But Jason knew better. He had been there. He had faced adversity. He had seen the other side of the fight. "No," Jason said quietly, leaning in slightly. "I don't know where you've been. But I know where you can go. I've been down dark roads too. I wasn't always Jason Statham. I didn't come from a silver spoon. But I found my way out. You can, too." Donovan scoffed, his eyes narrowed with disbelief. "You? You're some actor. You think you're some kind of hero?" Jason met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to play the hero. I'm here to tell you the truth. I've seen people make a change when they least expected it. You're not trapped unless you decide you are." There was a long pause. The train rattled on, but the car had gone quiet. Other passengers watched from a distance, sensing the gravity of the moment, but no one dared to interrupt. Jason continued, his voice softer now, more understanding. "I know what it's like to be desperate, to want something that's just out of reach. But there's a better way, Donovan. There's always a better way." Donovan swallowed hard, his eyes darting around, unsure of what to say next. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, not like the tough, desperate thief, but like a scared young man who had been cornered by life's struggles. Jason sat back in his seat, giving Donovan space. He wasn't there to pressure him, only to offer a glimpse of something else, something worth fighting for. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Donovan spoke again, his voice quieter this time, almost hesitant. "You really think I can change? I've already messed up so much." Jason nodded slowly. "I think everyone deserves a chance to change. But it starts with you. It starts with deciding you're ready to leave that life behind and do something better." The train rumbled on, and Donovan seemed to mull over Jason's words. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic moments. But in the silence between them, something shifted, a tiny spark of possibility. The kind of change that could start with a conversation, a moment of human connection. As the train approached the next stop, Jason stood up, giving Donovan a final look before heading for the door. "Think about it, Donovan. Change is always possible, no matter where you start." And with that, Jason stepped off the train, leaving behind a young man who had, perhaps, just been given a chance to start over. As the doors closed behind him, Jason glanced back one last time, knowing that sometimes the smallest moments, those quiet conversations, the glances exchanged in passing, could be the catalyst for something far bigger than anyone could imagine. Turning points and consequences. The subway train rumbled on through the tunnels of the city, its rhythmic sway easing Jason Statham into a deep, contemplative silence. He had stepped off, his feet taking him to the platform without any particular destination in mind. The train had pulled away, and the chaotic energy of the crowded car was replaced with the dimly lit platform, where the only sound was the distant hum of passing trains. Jason paused for a moment, his mind still tangled with the encounter with Donovan. As the train continued down the tracks, Jason wondered about the young man's fate. Had their conversation made a difference? Was Donovan truly listening, or was he just another lost soul trapped in the vicious cycle of poor decisions and desperation? Jason couldn't shake the feeling that what he had said, what he had offered, no matter how small, had the potential to shift something in the young man's life. But whether or not Donovan would seize that chance remained to be seen. Jason walked slowly along the platform, heading for the exit. His heart had been heavy lately, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Fame, success, the thrill of being an actor, it had all come at a cost. The deeper he got into his career, the more disconnected he became from the simple moments of life that truly mattered. What had started as a desire to tell stories on the big screen had grown into something more complicated. Fame had made him a spectacle. No longer just a man, but an image, Jason Statham, the tough guy, the action hero, the guy who always got the girl and always beat the odds. It wasn't real. None of it was. He thought about his last few roles, the grueling action scenes, the impossible stunts, and the relentless press tours that had taken him across the world. But none of it had been fulfilling. None of it had been real. The adrenaline rush of filming had worn off. What was left was a hollow shell of the man he once was, a man who had stopped living in the present and had started living for the next movie, the next paycheck, the next round of applause. The conversation with Donovan had reminded him of what he had lost, a connection to people, to stories that mattered. The world wasn't made up of scripted lines and choreographed fights. It was made of moments like the one he had just shared with the young man on the subway, a moment where two lives intersected, if only for a brief moment, and where something could change if the right words were spoken at the right time. Jason stepped out of the subway station and into the cool night air. He pulled his hoodie tighter around his shoulders and gazed out at the city that never seemed to sleep. The flashing lights, the crowded streets, the endless hum of activity, it all felt so distant, like he was an observer, watching life unfold from a distance rather than truly participating in it. But that moment with Donovan had felt different. It had felt like he was truly part of something again, like he had a purpose beyond the next movie or the next promotion. He had made a decision right then and there. It was time to make a real change, not just for himself, but for others as well. If he could help one person, just one, then perhaps that was the story he needed to tell. The next few days passed in a blur. Jason tried to shake off the weight of the encounter, but it lingered. It was almost as though the universe had handed him a reminder, life wasn't all about action sequences and larger-than-life personas. There were real people, with real problems, struggling to survive, to find meaning, to find redemption. And Jason knew he had the ability to make a difference. Meanwhile, Donovan's life had continued on its unpredictable path. After Jason had left, Donovan sat in the subway car, his mind racing. He had never expected anything like that. The world had always seemed like a place that had no room for him, a place where his mistakes had defined him. The constant fear of being caught, the desperation to get by, to survive, these had been his daily thoughts. He had never imagined that someone like Jason Statham would speak to him, let alone offer him advice. As the train pulled into the next station, Donovan hesitated. He could feel the weight of Jason's words hanging in the air. Change is always possible. But what did that mean for someone like him? Someone who had been in and out of trouble for years, someone who had seen the inside of more holding cells than he cared to count? Donovan stepped off the train at the next stop, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't just go back to the life he had been living. He knew that much. But could he really change? Was it too late for him? He wandered the streets aimlessly, trying to shake the image of Jason's calm, steady gaze from his mind. It was as though that brief interaction had planted a seed deep inside him. For the first time, he began to question everything, the choices he had made, the path he had taken, and whether there was a way out. As Donovan wandered, his thoughts spiraled. The streets he had once known so well now felt foreign to him, like a place he didn't belong. But just as the doubt began to creep in, he remembered something Jason had said: "It starts with you. It starts with deciding you're ready to leave that life behind and do something better." And in that moment, Donovan made a choice. It wasn't a grand, dramatic decision. There were no flashing lights or music swells, no applause. But in the quiet of his own mind, he made the decision to walk away from the life that had brought him nothing but pain. The first step wasn't easy. It was, in fact, terrifying. But it was a step nonetheless. Donovan walked into a local shelter that night, the warm lights inside offering a stark contrast to the cold, harsh streets outside. The counselor at the desk looked up in surprise as Donovan hesitated in the doorway, but he didn't let fear stop him. He walked in. "I want to get help," Donovan said, his voice shaky but determined. The counselor smiled, recognizing the seriousness in his voice. "You've come to the right place." Weeks passed, and both Jason and Donovan's lives began to shift in ways they never could have predicted. Jason found himself drawn to causes he had never considered before, working with at-risk youth, speaking to groups about the power of second chances, and using his platform to amplify voices that had long been silenced. Donovan, for his part, enrolled in a rehabilitation program and began working with mentors who showed him a different path, one that didn't require violence, theft, or deceit. The change wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its struggles. But both men found themselves, in their own ways, becoming more than the roles they had once been assigned in life. Jason wasn't just the action star anymore, he was a mentor, a guide, a man who had found his voice in the quiet moments. Donovan wasn't just a thief, he was someone who had decided to take control of his life, to rewrite his story, and to make something of himself that wasn't defined by his past. In the end, the encounter on that subway car became more than just an isolated moment, it was the beginning of a change, a shift in both their lives. A small gesture, a quiet conversation, and a simple decision had set them both on paths that were, in many ways, just beginning. And though neither man could have predicted the ripple effect their brief meeting would have, they both knew that the world was, in its own way, forever altered by that moment of human connection. Change, after all, always starts with one small step. Redemption and new beginnings. The city had always been a place of motion, a place where the grind never stopped, where people moved through life on autopilot, chasing goals that were often set by others. But for Jason Statham, this once bustling, ceaseless world had begun to feel a little different. It had been a few months since that life-changing encounter on the subway, and in that time, both Jason and Donovan had found their paths taking unexpected turns, ones that neither of them had anticipated. Jason had long since discarded his fame-fueled distractions. No longer was he the center of attention at every press event, nor was he subject to the constant paparazzi clicks that had once marked his every move. Instead, he found himself immersed in work that was far more meaningful than anything Hollywood had ever offered him. Through collaborations with nonprofits, he began mentoring young men and women who had grown up in similar circumstances to Donovan, teaching them about resilience, hope, and the power of personal change. It was not the glamorous world of film sets, but it was real, it was raw. And it was the first time Jason felt truly connected to the world around him. The satisfaction of helping someone rebuild their life, of giving them a chance when they felt like they had none, felt far more fulfilling than winning any award. Jason had found a renewed purpose, and it was one that took him far from the action-packed roles he had once been known for. His new role was that of a guide, someone who could speak from experience, someone who had seen the darkness that came with fame and fortune and knew how to find the light on the other side. But there was still one thing gnawing at him. One thing that weighed on his heart, the question of Donovan. What had become of the young man who had once been a lost soul, a thief with no hope? Jason hadn't heard from Donovan in weeks. He hadn't expected the young man to reach out, but he couldn't help wondering whether Donovan had truly embraced the changes he had promised. After all, Jason had given him more than just words. He had given him a piece of his own life, a bit of himself. But life, as Jason knew too well, had a way of turning back to its darker, more familiar paths when the light seemed too distant, too unreachable. Donovan, on the other hand, was not the same person he had been that day on the subway. In the months since Jason had spoken to him, he had fought tooth and nail to stay on the straight path, resisting the temptation to revert to his old ways. His time at the shelter had been the first step, his first true admission that he needed help. It hadn't been easy. Every day had been a struggle. The old habits died hard, and every step forward felt like an uphill climb. But with the support of his mentors, he slowly began to rebuild. He attended meetings, took classes, and worked hard to stay focused. But more than that, he had made a commitment to himself, a promise to be better, to rise above his past, to embrace the life he had once thought impossible. Despite the progress he had made, Donovan knew that he wasn't done. He still had much to learn, much to prove, not just to the world, but to himself. He had often found himself thinking back to Jason's words, "Change starts with you. It starts with deciding you're ready to leave that life behind and do something better." Those words had been a lifeline, a beacon in the storm of confusion and regret. And Donovan knew that, for him, there could be no turning back. He couldn't afford to go back to the life he had lived before. It wasn't just about avoiding jail or trouble, it was about finding something worth living for. It was one evening, as he was finishing a shift at his part-time job at a local cafe, that he received the call. His heart skipped when he saw the name on the screen. It was Jason. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect. Would Jason be disappointed in him for not making more progress? Would he feel like Donovan had let him down? But when he answered, Jason's voice was warm, familiar. Reassuring, even. "Donovan?" Jason's tone was different than it had been on the subway. Gone was the stern, no-nonsense attitude. Now, there was a softness, an understanding that came through. "It's Jason." Donovan's throat tightened as he sat down on the cafe stool, unsure of what to say. "Yeah. Jason. It's been a while." Jason's laugh was gentle. "I've been keeping an eye on you, kid. I was hoping to hear from you, but I guess I couldn't wait anymore." Donovan swallowed hard. I'm trying, Jason. I really am. Some days are harder than others." "I know," Jason replied. "And that's okay. It's not about being perfect. It's about staying on the path, even when it feels like you're alone. You're not alone, though. I'm here." Those words, simple as they were the encouragement Donovan needed. He had spent so much time fighting this battle on his own, feeling isolated in his struggle. To hear someone who genuinely cared, someone who had seen it all, tell him that he wasn't alone, it was a lifeline. "Thanks, Jason. I needed to hear that." "I know," Jason said. "I've got an opportunity for you. I'm working with a few organizations that help at-risk youth, and I think you'd be a good fit. I'm not asking for a commitment right away. I just want to know if you're willing to give it a shot. No pressure." Donovan's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to step into something bigger, something that could change everything. He had been waiting for a sign, a reason to keep going. And now, it had come. "I'm in," Donovan said, his voice firm. "I want to help. I want to give back. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to do better." Jason's voice softened. "That's all anyone can ask for. I'm proud of you, Donovan." The call ended, and Donovan sat in silence, staring at the phone in his hand. He had just taken a monumental step. He had made the decision to step into the light, to not only change his life but to help others do the same. It wasn't going to be easy. He knew that. But for the first time in years, Donovan felt a sense of purpose. The world had opened up in front of him, and he was no longer defined by the mistakes of his past. He was defined by his choices. Jason hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, looking out at the city skyline. He had done his part, but he knew Donovan was the one who had to walk the walk. Jason could guide him, but it was Donovan who had to take the first step, and he had. It was a victory, small in the grand scheme of things, but a victory nonetheless. And it was the beginning of something new, for both of them. The city hummed with life, as it always did. But for Jason and Donovan, it felt like a new chapter had begun. A chapter of redemption, of change, of second chances. And no one could predict where it would lead, but one thing was certain: both of their lives would never be the same.